Now, now I'm gonna go back and share my screen. In part one, we broke down real simply Lemuria in scripture, right? I'm going to share the screen so we can break it down again. We broke down what is the western part of the world and what is the eastern part of the world, according to what makes sense and according to definition of east and west, and according to scripture. Let's get it in, right? We got 40 minutes. Now, again, we went over how these two are two different creations. And just because it says all of this at once does not mean that everybody was created at one time. It just means that that we were going to be created in the image. It says, so Elohim created man in his image. In the image of Elohim created he him, female and male and female created he them. So we know this is a passage of time. This is over moments. This can be over thousands of years, millions of years, right? Whenever, right? We went over how male and female created he them, which means that the polarities inside of the original man was separated, right? The original man had both perfect balance of a masculine polarity and a feminine polarity, the masculine principle and a feminine principle. And he created male and female, right? So male being the masculine, being the dominant, being the first, right? And the female being the feminine polarity of the male. Female or feminine, the feminine male, right? These are the feminine principles that was separated, right? But we can go over that again in another presentation. But for right now, we are here to prove Lemuria, mind you. Now, here we are again. We says he formed man out the dust of the ground. We already went over, and that dust is stardust, right here. Stardust. It doesn't say I made you from earth because it clearly used earth. It clearly used in the beginning Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Else it would have said I made you from the earth. It says I made you from the dust. Out of the ground Yahuwah made everything to grow. So out of the ground the trees was made, right? But clearly, right here it says form a man of the dust that was upon, right? You have to understand language in order to understand it. You have to understand language, the formation of language and punctuation to understand it. Breathe into his nostrils the breath of life, consciousness, awareness, right? When you take a deep breath, it pumps blood to the brain, right? So there's a science to this. This is just all summarized. This is millions and millions, tens of millions of years of history summarized. It is not linear. It's unlinear, right? Because Yahweh planted a garden eastward in Eden. So we already went over how everything was considered Eden, right? Because everything was together. Everything that was attached was considered Eden, right? We, we showed that all of this was together at a point in time, and it was considered Eden. But he planted a garden eastward in Eden, right here. This was the garden eastward in Eden, because in order for Europe and Iceland to be considered the western part of the world, in order for Russia to be considered the western part of the world, we will have to turn this map counterclockwise. And then it makes sense. That's when it makes sense. So all of this was Eden, but Lemuria was the garden eastward in Eden, right? So if you break it down a little further, if you was to say Marietta is westward and Marietta is westward in Atlanta, we understand that Atlanta is a particular area, right? We understand that Atlanta will be a particular area, right? So we say Marietta is westward of Atlanta, but in this case, in Atlanta. We could say westward of Georgia, but that would just mean it's on this side. Westward in Georgia, it's on this side. Westward in Atlanta would be right here. So we in Atlanta and we are westward in Atlanta, we will be at the border of Marietta. Westward in Atlanta would be the border. So it's the same thing. Westward and eastward in Eden, you will be at the border of Lemuria. This information was removed because if you knew exactly where you come from and who you are, you will understand that we never ever believed in the concept of there being a God separate from us. We believe that we are and we are a part of. We are the extension of the Creator. We are the extension of the Most High, right? We believe and we knew it wasn't a belief, it was a knowledge. We knew the wisdom of knowing. We knew, right? But let's keep it going. So what I last left off at is right here. How do we know, right? Is because now when we scroll down and we talk about how Cain was kicked out of Eden, right? He says, Canaan went out from the presence of Yahweh and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. We just explained eastward in something would mean you are at the border of another, right? Eastward in Eden, you're at the border. So this is, he dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Where is the east of Eden? It is today what they would call South India, but if we turn the map to the correct place, it is right here. How do we know this is true? How do we know this is true? Because if it wasn't, why would we have ancient temples? Why would there be ancient temples in what they call South India, but which is really the east of Eden, right? The east of Eden. How do we know? It's because now, when we read scripture and we read about Canaan's children, right? His descendants, right? The instructor of every artificial and brass and iron, right? So let's do this. Here are the weapons of ancient India. Hold on. Who are they trying to pick this man to look like? Who are this? They trying to pick this man to look like? What is this? That's brass and iron. Brass and iron. Well, that's a bad. That's not a real picture. Brass and iron, right? That's in scripture. Where's this at? In India, right? So now, what else do we get in scripture? Right? He was the father of such as that handle harp and organ, harp, instrument. These are Indian instruments, right? You probably seen them in the movie, in the cartoon movie Hercules, right? They're imitating. The veena is the oldest known Indian instrument. Let's see what this looks like. 1,000 years BC, right? The oldest known. It doesn't mean it's the oldest. It's just the oldest known that they know. What is this? Come on now. Harp and organ. Harp has strings, right? When we look at depictions, we see them, we see, when we look at different depictions of the harp, these are Indian. These are what you would call India, right? The Veena. This is a harp. We see right here on these stones, ancient uh, ca- uh carvings, ancient coins. They're playing the Veena. They're playing the harp. So that's how we know that's where Cain was on the east of Eden, which is what they call today southern India, right? They said right here, it said Yahuwah. This is when man got drove out of Lemuria. He said Yahuwah sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. So he drove out the man and he placed at the east of Eden. And now, right here is we have to we have to translate a lot of this stuff into Hebrew because there's a lot when we're talking about man, they're talking about different types of people, right? Different group races of people. But because this is a summarized language in the English language, it's everything isn't going to be translated because some of these words are not in the root Hebrew language, right? So there will have to be a lesson on reading the Hebrew, and then we can read what it's really talking about. So these are different types of people that's interacting at this point, right? When it talks about man. Um, so he drove out the man and placed at the east of the garden. We just said that the east is today, modern day southern India. At the east of the garden, a cherubim and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life, right? To keep the way of the tree of life. A cherubim, which is in Ezekiel is described as, a UFO, what they would call a UFO today, with a flaming sword. They give a good description of a cherubim and what it looks like, but that's we're gonna save that for another time, right? So now, and this is what I mean. All of this is one. This is why it's not linear. It's not like this happened, then this. All of this is happening around the same time at the same time, right? So now, in Scripture, in Bereshit 11, chapter 11. If I can get that pulled up here, I will show y'all. In Bereshit chapter 11, it talks about how they journeyed from the east. Mind you, we just showed you where the east was. They journeyed from here. They journeyed from the east, right? Journey from the east. Now, when we get to talking about what was going on, right? And it came to pass, man began to multiply on the face of the earth. Again, this is a summary. This little bit right here is a summary of millions of years. Because when it came to pass, it's over a time period. A time period. You only get that time period when you translate this language into the Hebrew language. Because each Hebrew symbol, pictograph, is assigned a number. It has a numeric value. And those numeric values tell you what the action was, because the Hebrew language, Hebrew period, is about functionality, and it's not about what it looks like at all. It's about how a thing functions. So everything we're reading right here, when you translate it to the Hebrew, it's about functionality, how a thing functions, and you are able to know where a thing is based upon its function. Because looks can be deceiving. So we don't go by how something looks. We go by how a thing functions. If I told you to drive a car, but I didn't tell you how, and you don't know how it functions, you're not gonna know how to drive a car. You're just gonna know what it looks like. And you might go and start it up, and it might be a toy car. It might not be a real car. It could be anything. It can be a fake, uh, what they call it, prop car, because you are looking at how it looks and not the function of it. Now, when you understand the function, you'll be able to get in the car, turn the key, and you can say, okay, this is a real car. You can look at the engine and say, okay, the function of this, okay, this is the real car. Based upon how a thing functions, right? It's a verb language. It means an action language, right? So again, we'll do another presentation on that. And this is my first presentation, y'all, on just doing this period. I haven't ever really gave a presentation. So it's a little choppy, don't get me wrong, we're gonna clean it up. And as time goes forward, um, it'll be better. So now when we're talking about where the true um when we're talking about where the true Noah's Ark was, so now we know Cain was in the east of Eden, right? Cain was in the east of Eden. Then we get the generations of Adama, right? We're not talking about just one person. We're talking about a race of original people. Adama, right? So we get that, and we know that they came out on the east as well. They were all dwelling in the east. They were all dwelling in the east, on the east in what they call today South India. Now, they don't have it here. Where's that? Where it tells you how high the water prevails. So even right here, when you break down the length of cubits, it's not as high as people think. It's not as high as they try to make it seem. It's not that big. The ark wasn't that big. right? Well, because they don't have it up here, this is just they don't have the full version up here, so I'm not signed up to download it, so I'll read it. But I'm reading out the same thing. So when we are talking about the flood now, we have to understand that in history, right, they already agreed that there was a flood right here. They said humans has not been around in this earth for more than 5,000, 10,000 years. The Bible timeline of genealogists and chronologists gives an age for the human race around 6,000 years, with a genetic bottleneck occurring about 4,500 years ago when the earth was repopulated by Noah's three sons and their wives after a global flood. After a global flood. So these Neanderthals easily fit within impractical, empirical, I pronounced that wrong. I killed that word, but hey, don't matter. Data was being a, oh, empirical data as being a post-flood people, right? So that means people were made after the flood, and we get that. So they already confirmed about a flood, right? They confirmed the flood, right? So now, when we read the flood was only 22 feet high. There were geysers that came up, right? So something, there were tectonic plates moving. It was a tsunami. There were geysers, so underwater volcanoes exploding, and it came up to 22 feet high. How do we know? As it says in scriptures, the water prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, upon all the hills, and were under the heavens, 15 cubits upward, which is 22 feet high, right? 22 feet high. Chapter 8 of Bereshit, it says, the fountains of the deep and the windows of heavens were stopped, which means the rain stopped and the fountains of the deep. Fountains of the deep being volcanoes, geysers, right? So it says right here, it says, and the ark rested in the seventh month on the 17th day upon the mountains of Aret. Let's break this down real quick. Let's get busy. So they was already in the east. It was already right here. A flood came and pushed them this way, pushed them this way. In our last presentation, we already read how there were 7,000-year-old stones connecting Sri Lanka to India. And then we already showed you how there was a bridge connecting the lemurs of Madagascar to India. And I already showed you how they confirmed that there are artifacts in part one. Right, here's the information about the bridge. There were artifacts in part one that was in the Indian Ocean, right? And how the most uh, forbidden place to go is the North Sentinel Island right here, which is a breakaway island in this ocean right here, a breakaway island, right? And then we even get to see what they look like. right? These are niggas. These are not the Indians that you see today, right? There are videos of them, and they would. And the reason why it's forbidden because they're extremely dangerous. They killed anybody that came on their island. There are videos of them of the United States attempting to make first contact, and people were killed. We don't know what's on this island, but we know it's sacred, right? They don't tell you that, right? So now, when we're talking about this flood, we have to understand that this flood came 22 feet high and pushed them this way towards the east because they journeyed. Because after the flood, it says they journeyed from the east, so it pushed them more eastward. How do we know? Because Scripture says the mountain rested in the mountains of Ares. Peep game. So they would say mountain of Ares, right? This is called Mount Ares. But Scripture clearly says mountains, meaning more than one, plural, right? This is way higher than 22 feet high. This is way higher than 22 feet high, right? This is way higher. Let's break it down further. Let's break it down further. Where Turkey is, right here, above Iraq, right? Above Iraq. So Turkey would be right here. So they said after the flood, they journeyed from the east. That's an 11. They journeyed from the east. How can you journey from the east if you're north? In order to journey from the east, you will have to come this way. You will have to be right here. That means they will have to say they journeyed from the north and found a place in Somalia. But it doesn't. It says they journeyed from the east, which is over here. They have to journey from here, right? So we're gonna crush right there. The whole theory of Noah's Ark being in Turkey, crushed straight up right there. How it's crushed again? It's because this is way higher than 22 feet tall. Crushed, crushed. Now, mountain of Erech. This is in Australia. Australia. Let's see what it looks like. Let's see if we can do the map up. Let's see if we can do the map up. Right here. These are the mountains. These are the mountains. This is where Noah's Ark rested. And it just so happens that they are building a fake Noah's Ark. So it will make more sense that the flood will leave them here. How do we know? About to break it down again. It's about to get crazy. This where it get real crazy. About to break it down again. I'm gonna give you the scripture. Bereshit, chapter 8, verse 13. And behold, when Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. The face of the ground was dry. That's not dry. That's snow. Snow is not dry. It's liquid. You gotta read between these lines. You know what's dry? This is Australia. Dry land, right? How does something become so dry? Australia dry land. One of the driest continents on the planet, Australia's subsoils contain some of the world's largest underground salt deposits from centuries of rock erosion and sea salt deposition from surrounding ocean. How did so much water get on that land? Water can transport these salt deposits either deeper in the earth or up to its surface. So it's clearly stating that in all of this land of Australia, it's water damage. Salt came upon the land and dried it out from centuries of rock erosion. Come on now. Come on now. Come on now. But we're going to keep pushing. We got 10 minutes. We're going to keep pushing. So now, we just proved in scripture that Noah's Ark landed in Australia and then they journeyed from the east. They journeyed from the east. They confirmed underwater cities in India. They confirmed these things. Come on now. Look, underwater city in India. They confirmed Dwarka. They confirmed this, that they found these things right here in 1988. They confirmed it. 10,000 years old. This is real stuff. The Indian city of Dwarka is known in the Hindu culture to have been the great and beautiful city of Krishna. Come on now. There was a flood all around the same time. The Hindu writings say that when Krishna left the earth to join the spiritual world, the age of Kali began and Dwarka and its inhabitants were submerged by the sea. Come on now. So these are facts, people. We've seen that when Cain, his sons were his descendants were the father of brass and iron, brass and iron. When we read Leviticus, when we read Exodus, this is the description of the priest. So this is, come on now, this is way before Moshe. All right, so my phone had disconnected. But come on now, we get the heart. So we got all our artifacts pointing in the east. We got confirmation from the flood that Neanderthals were post-flood. We get that in scripture. So when it talks about the sons of Elohim, which are us, because we are the sons of Elohim, messing with man, some of our people was, I'm gonna say what it is. Some of our people was getting down with Neanderthals. So it wasn't a thing that they got down with some Neanderthals before, and then after the flood, it happened more than once. Before the flood, they was doing it, and then after the flood, they was doing it.
During the flood, they was doing it because everywhere on the earth wasn't flooded. Just anywhere that was under 22 feet high. Come on now. We just crushed it. That it couldn't have been in Turkey, the Noah's Ark, because of the location and what Scripture says and how it described the land as being dry. Those mountains aren't dry; they're covered with snow. That's not dry. That's ice, which is water, which is wet. Which means if you come a little bit further down the mountain, it's wet. It wasn't dry, right? So again, right? I was gonna do this and prove how everybody else except for the Negroid people are Neanderthals. Yes, I'm talking about some Mexicans that you see. Everybody that's melanated does not come from where we come from. So you will see a lot the so-called Mexicans, the Europeans, the Eurasians, um, Iceland. It, they're not the same as us, right? It's proven in their genetics. It's proven in everything, their functionality. They're not the same. A lot of them are mixed with Neanderthal DNA. We don't have Neanderthal DNA, right? But again, I'll do that in another presentation. This is Henrietta Lacks, who has the immortal cells. Her cells were immortal. Look, Lacks died of cancer 6 years ago, but her cells taken without her knowledge or consent are still alive today, and they're multiplying. They're using this woman's cells. Harriett's cells were the first immortal human cells ever grown in culture. They were essentially to develop in the paleo vaccine. They went up in the first space missions to see what would happen in the cells in zero gravity. Come on now. Immortal cells. But again, we'll do that in another presentation. But so we just broke down easily Lemuria, easily, none but scripture. We could have got crazy. The brother Mighty Hebrew goes crazy with other documentation. I didn't even use no documentation other than scripture and common sense of definition of the western part from the east, what that mean in order for something to be east. We proved that. Then after we proved Lemuria and that Noah at the time was in southern India and what they call today, but it's really eastern India, and they flooded it. It was a flood, and it pushed them towards Australia in the mountains of Ores, not the Mount Ores, in the mountains, meaning more than one. How do we know that? It's because we proved it because of the dry land that was said from centuries of water moved upon the land, salt water moved on the land, and rock erosion. Then we also show that the bridge connecting Sri Lanka, there were stones connecting Sri Lanka and India. There were stones up there that was 3,000 years older than 4,000-year-old sand. The sand was 4,000 years, but the rocks on them was seven, at least means it could have been longer, at least 7,000 years. These are facts. A bridge connecting these two. Sri Lanka. Have y'all not seen that? What Sri Lanka look like? So we got to understand this is where we're coming from. A tropical land, right? A tropical land. A tropical land. This is where we're coming from, right? When we got kicked out of Lemuria, we would sit on the east.